Hello, listeners. Just to let you know that we've got a great new live event coming up. Join us on April 21st at the Lantern Theatre in Bristol as we interview Michael Morpurgo.
One of the UK's best-loved authors, Michael has written over 150 books, including Private Peaceful, Kensuke's Kingdom and Warhorse. Michael also writes non-fiction for adults, including the Sunday Times bestseller Spring and Funny Thing Getting Older.
Get your tickets at livenation.co.uk.
Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, we speak to the screenwriter and novelist Doug Naylor.
We spoke to Doug about breaking into the world of comedy, about creating the hit 90s science fiction comedy show Red Dwarf, about writing fiction, and his latest book for children, Sin Bin Island.
It's a great episode, and if you're enjoying it on YouTube, please don't forget to like, subscribe and comment.
Hi, Doug. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on Always Take Notes. Could we start off with Sin Bin Island, the kind of beginnings of this project? It's a bit of a dark idea, this orphanage for wayward boys and girls, and then the worst kids sent off to Sin Bin Island with just bread and water. Tell us about where this all began for you.
So it's not dark at all. In fact, it's actually it's an epic adventure, but I've been told, I think, it's also a comedy novel. So it's not, it could be a horror movie in one sense, but it's not like that at all. It's not dark. There's drama in it. It's quite moving in places. Yeah.
You felt that Lord of the Flies had kind of already been done.
Yeah, it's not Lord of the Flies. It's a great deal funnier than Lord of the Flies. The idea is it's the four worst behaved kids in the school, or maybe they're not the four worst behaved kids in the school, as it turns out, are banished to this island where back in the day it was rumoured smugglers used it to ferry treasure from the island to the mainland, and there's a rumour that there's a hidden tunnel.
And is it right that it's partially inspired by your own school days? We saw you went to this specialist music school, but you were not yourself musical.
Yeah, I went there 2 years before it became a music school. And then brilliant students came in. It was an all boys school when I originally went there. Then girls came in, but the teachers were seriously eccentric. I think would be fair. Would be one of the nicest things to say. Boys were regularly sent to buy the chemistry teacher cigarettes. One time he used a cigarette to mark on the blackboard while putting some chalk in his mouth. The chemistry lab was regularly set fire to because of his wrong instructions. So and there was a feeling of, because it was founded, I think, in 1653. Originally, it was a charity school for the poor, and so it was. The whole thing was quite oppressive and dark, and we had Baronial Hall, the refectory, a lot of that stuff.
And you've talked elsewhere about how orphans and boarding schools are a popular trope in children's literature, and particularly because boarding schools mean that you have groups of young people together who are friends who can go on adventures together. Tell us a little bit about why those tropes were useful for you and how you put your own spin on them.
It's basically so you don't have parents to report to. You can go on midnight adventures, you can do stuff. So it's simply that, I think. Not that you can't have, great children's stories where kids go home at night, but that was, the root of the idea came from a TV series I wrote that was never made, about two kids who found a flying saucer. And boarded the flying saucer and pressed the wrong buttons, and it took off and it crashed, and they wound up being taken into Area 51, where it was believed that they were aliens, and an adventure ensued. And at the time, it was felt it was too expensive to make that, and I thought I want to make turn that into a novel. People did say at the time, if you made this into a novel, it would make a great film. So that was my starting point. I would just engineer a place where this flying saucer should crash, and I thought orphanages. I'll crash it there, but then no, I can't do that. That would still be too crowded. Oh, maybe the 4 worst behaved kids get banished to this island, and the UFO or the flying saucer rather, can crash there. So that was the starting point. I started at the beginning of this thing, and then had a lot of fun in the school getting merits and demerits and the whole political situation. And it was my son who said, I don't think you need the flying saucer anymore. Junk the flying saucer and make it about smugglers and hidden tunnels and all those kind of kids tropes, but do a spin on them all so they're all quite different. And I think he turned out to be absolutely right.
And in terms of creating the characters, we saw you commented elsewhere that you wanted the main gang to number 4 to be different from one another, to have unique flaws, but ultimately to come together in a team like the posse do in Red Dwarf. Do you think that you can do that with 4 in a way that doesn't work as a two-hander, or if you've got a bigger ensemble cast? Is that the kind of sweet spot?
For a TV series, there's a huge advantage in doing 4 because you can split them off into 2 so you've got something else to cut to. Then you could do, so that's enormously, I mean, it makes, the novel is obviously in Diggs's voice, and we see everything through his eyes. So you don't have the 2 going off. But that's kind of why I plumped for the 4.
And in terms of the experience of writing a novel versus a screenplay, I mean, you've talked elsewhere about the kind of freedom that you have when you're on the page, writing on the page. You can do anything. You don't have budget constraints. You don't need to think about production teams, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Do you write in a similar way in terms of having to plot different arcs, different characters' journeys, know your midpoint, know your turning points, all that stuff? Or do you work in a also more kind of free, kind of unplanned, loose way when you're writing fiction?
I'm aware of the structure all the time, but I don't necessarily, I know where I'm going, but I don't know exactly what the end is. And then, of course, you refine it because you rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. So when I first started writing, I would get stuck in a scene and wouldn't know why I'm stuck. But as I got more knowledgeable, I realised nothing was happening in the scene, or there was no conflict. I know in terms of story structure, I'd be quite confident to go into something knowing, the characters have got to have a goal, there's got to be obstacles, and then all the things you plant have got to have payoffs. But then you can go back and plant things and have payoffs, so it looks much cleverer than it would do in the first draft where you're just stumbling around.
Just expanding that point a little bit, we recently spoke to Mario Buffini, who has also crossed the screenwriting, novel writing point. And I think that she said she found very different was just dealing with the way the industry works, and that she turned up for her novel with like a fully worked out treatment, presenting exactly how everything's going to happen and things. And the way she put this is that's expected in TV just because the costs are so high, right? That there's so much on the line. When you were working on this, when you were presenting it to your agent and stuff, did you come to them with this is exactly what it's going to be? Or did you take a more sort of freeform approach? Were you still working like a screenwriter when you were dealing with the industry, or were you operating a bit differently?
Okay. I don't think I operate like a screenwriter. But to answer the second question first, I wrote 104,000 word novel, and went to my agent, have a read of this, and she made some little points, and then it went off. No, she recommended, actually, she had a friend who was an editor, and it went to him, and we did some tweaks here and there, and then it went off to find a publisher. Then most of the publishers said this is too long because kids don't like reading, which I hadn't realised at the time, and probably would not have tackled the subject with such enthusiasm. You don't really want the novel to be much more than 50,000 words, which seemed to contradict what I was seeing in Waterstones and indie bookshops, where a lot of the kids' bestsellers were far more than that. So what was suggested was I turn this 104,000 word novel into 2 novels, which I did, but except you can't just split it down the middle. I had to do a whole new second half of the first half, as it were. And that's what, and then when I did that, they went, oh, can you expand this? Can you expand that? So it then turned into, I think it's 80,000 now.
How painful was that process of turning 1 into 2? Because as you say, it's not just a case of being like slapped down the middle, off you go.
I really enjoyed it. I mean, the whole thing was such a blast writing this, and I can't explain why. I mean, it's because there were a lot of laughs in it. It's an epic adventure. There is magic in it, but it's kind of like the science fiction from Red Dwarf. So there's a magic stone that turns things back into a previous state. So there's all sorts of fun, you can have with that. And also there's eventually they come across a treasure chest, and the only way to open the treasure chest is you have to insert your arms into the treasure chest, and it locks you into place. And before this, they'd found 4 skeletons locked into place who clearly hadn't passed whatever you needed to pass. And then it turns out there's this kind of steampunk machine tells them that they all have to reveal a secret. And it will be able to tell whether they're lying or not by their body heat. And so they then reveal things which I think will shock readers. I know it shocks readers because I know that. So that's kind of what I was talking about trying to get some freshness into, it's not just like you find treasure and then everyone goes home, it's more interesting than that, I hope.
What do you think accounts for that discrepancy between what the industry thinks children will read and then, your evidence, anecdotal, but I think convincing of actually what children are reading? I mean, we've heard so much about diminished attention spans, loss of childhood reading, but as you say, there are still kids reading big books. Why do you think there is that difference between the industry perception and the reality?
I wonder if for years kids have been influenced and encouraged to read books which have dated. So C.S. Lewis, for example, Earthsea are both regarded as absolute classics. But if I was 12, that's not something I wouldn't have enjoyed either of those books. And then there are quite, deep philosophical points that are being made about religion, about the dark side. As a 12-year-old, I wouldn't have had a clue about that. As a 12-year-old, if you're encouraging me to read, I want to laugh. I want to have excitement, I want to have adventure, and I want to love the characters and have lots of twists. The other stuff can come later, I think. So I just wonder if for a long time the wrong books have been encouraged to read. And when you get, say, an A.F. Stedman, who's much more in the way I've described about action and adventure and all that, is, huge hit. J.K. Rowling, exactly the same. And if you can get them and they start to read, then I think they are readers for life.
I know that your grown-up son had some feedback on the plot when you were writing it, but had you spoken to your kind of target demographic while you were writing or before you were writing? Well,
before I wrote, my wife, when I was just thinking possibly I might do this, told a great nephew and a great niece I was in fact writing a children's book, much to my horror, because I didn't want to have to speak about this until I'd worked it out. This was the UFO version, and they said, "Oh, great! What's it about?" And so I then, interestingly, pitched them the Sin Bin Island thing, and they were both very enthusiastic about that and said, "Oh, we will definitely read that." So I was kind of locked into it then. And so, yeah. But they were the only 2 people, the only 2 kids I spoke to.
With a kind of younger end of the children's market, so, picture books or books for 5 or 6 year olds, again, people often talk about the challenge and the complexity of playing to 2 readers. So it's got to engage the young child, but also particularly if it's being read aloud, often repeatedly, it's got to do something for the parent as well. Do you think you're talking 12-year-old here, do you think that's a slightly different game, that this is unaccompanied reading now, and so you don't have to think about kind of an adult in the background who you're also speaking to?
Sure. I know exactly what you're saying. If I'm honest, I've only ever written for me. And so I never think, writing Red Dwarf, will this get a laugh? Do I think this is funny? If I like this, do I like this idea? And it was exactly the same with Sin Bin. I didn't even think it did. I sort of just fell into it, and it just seemed such fun to write. And I wasn't thinking, oh, but this is for kids. In fact, I was slightly shocked, when which is, I know sounds utterly ludicrous, when I'm signing copies and kids are buying it. It's sort of like, oh, yeah, you're children, aren't you? I didn't really ever have a picture of children reading it, although I knew I was writing a book for children, if that makes any sense. Yeah, it probably doesn't. It was just, I was, right, does it? Okay. I was writing it, for the younger me. The book I couldn't find as a kid.
Well, that was actually what I just wanted to ask you next, was about your own childhood and the sort of things that you loved reading growing up. Was it, Treasure Island? Was it?
It was Treasure Island, but Treasure Island I struggle with. There were too many words I didn't understand. It was a very nautical. I sort of groped around with, I'm always given what I was given, which a lot of Enid Blyton, Secret Seven, Famous Five, all that. And then I started to really look books when I sort of used to nick my dad's Alistair MacLean, Where Eagles Dare, the action adventure, those kind of things. And then, of course, at school we were doing Lord of the Flies and To Kill a Mockingbird and that kind of stuff too.
We liked your anecdote about stuffing tissues into your recorder in order that you would not be heard at your music school. But just moving forward a little bit more in your educational journey, you studied psychology at university, but you got kicked out.
Yes.
Tell us about that. And then we saw these comments that your professor said, what are you good at? Do something you're good at. Tell us about that moment and the kind of point of departure.
That was a real turning point for me. I did psychology because I thought it would teach you about people and humanity and all that stuff. And in fact, it was teaching, if you electrocute goldfish on one side of the tank, they swim to the other side of the tank. Who knew? And then you would have to do a load of maths to prove this was significant. There was a lot of chi-squared tests, I remember, a lot of training rats to run mazes, and I didn't realise at the time I'm numerically dyslexic, and so the whole maths thing, although I'd scraped GCSE at maths, was just a nightmare. So I sort of dropped out while still attending. And there wasn't an exam until the end of the second year. And a third of the year were thrown out, and I was one of them. And while I was being thrown out, the professor invited me in to tell me he was throwing me out, and he said, "You're clearly no interested in this. What do you love, and what are you good at?" And just before this, my best friend, who had also gone to school with, Rob Grant, and I had written this sitcom because I'd seen this article in the Daily Express where this guy had written a sitcom for the very first time and sent it up to ITV, and it was on TV that night. It was called Paradise Island. I think it was a bit of a rip-off of Gilligan's Island. And I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't realise it was so easy to get stuff on television. And I went to the pub I was about 19, went to the pub that night with my friends and said, I'm going to write a sitcom. because it's a piece of cake, apparently, to get stuff on TV. And it seems like a really fun way to, and I hate the psychology thing. And Rob, who was there at the time, he went, yeah, I'll give you a hand. So we sent this script off about 2 private detectives, and it came back a few weeks later, and it rejected it. But one of the things it said was, we wrote mildly amusing dialogue. And so when this professor said, what are you good at? I thought, well, I co-write mildly amusing dialogue. Maybe if, we study this, we can get to write laughter-evoking dialogue. So Rob went off and got a job, and I pretended to my parents to resit my psychology exam at what was then called Manchester Poly, when in fact I went into Manchester Central Library and they had this incredible media department with screenplays and books on writing. And I did that for a whole year, while every day pretending to my parents I was going into psychology, but not going near the place, and knowing that there was a cut-off point, because as soon as the exam started, I couldn't possibly go. In fact, I'm feeling quite stressed about that, just thinking about that now. I couldn't possibly go in and take the exam because I knew nothing. People would go, who are you? And so I then had to fess up, and my dad said, okay, well, if you want to be a sitcom writer, you need to get a proper job so you can pay your way until you sell your sitcom. And that's what happened.
Were you coming home and being like, tough day at college, I've been more goldfish today?
I can't remember how elaborate the lies were. Yeah. But yeah. No one was really interested. Yeah, how was your day? Yeah, no, it's fine. And it was a great course. I've said before, I was as head lecturer of my own course. It was wonderful because if I was feeling in a good mood, I'd go off and see a comedy movie in the afternoon. So it was in fact, it really, really helped. It was great. It was one of the best fun years of my life, I think.
Could you tell us about one of the books that you read that time, which we saw was called Writing for Television by a man with the incredible name of Malcolm Hulke?
Yes.
And his idea of you have to do things 3 times. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, he was talking about how you establish character traits. And so if you want to establish someone is mean, you should give 3 examples of them being mean, and then the reader or audience will think they're mean, which I guess works. But then at the time I remember thinking, so does that mean you have to murder 3 people to establish you're a murderer? I think you can probably do it with just 1. So it was quite simple advice. And there was one book, as far as I could see, about writing for television. There was nothing else around at the time, and obviously there was no internet. There was nothing, and there was a rumor that you could go to directing school or film school, but if you went to film school, it was guaranteed you would never wind up in the film industry. So there didn't seem to be very many options, as far as I could see, apart from teaching yourself.
And in terms of teaching yourself, was it looking at scripts themselves? Did you kind of deconstruct what your favourite comedy shows were doing, like on the page?
Yeah. Or try to, yes. I went to see a lot of Woody Allen films and tried to write down his one-liners to understand why I was laughing at them. But, generally I was laughing, so I didn't write anything down. But then I went to see things like Sleeper and Annie Hall and Take the Money and Run and all those kind of films. Over 20 times, and read about him and read about his influences. And so one of the people he recommended was Groucho Marx and the Marx Brothers. So I'd then read about them, and then we get into Jack Benny, and then I was listening to Mel Brooks's 10,000-Year-Old Man, and so it became, from one thing to the other, I would just Frank Capra. I would go from sort of, oh, they love that. Who's that? I've never heard that person. We go around. It was mainly American, I think, for the most part. The 2 great shows I liked in the UK were Porridge and Fawlty Towers, and obviously read the screenplays of those many times.
And at this period, while you were making your way, what was the proper job or jobs that you were doing in parallel?
Well, I was a student not attending Manchester Polytechnic for the best part of a year. And then I got a job in it was General Universal Stores, where I was putting paper into computers all day and pressing buttons, and then it would print out the paper with, I think, the orders. And so that was the day job, I think, for about 18 months.
And once you decided, or at least once your dad had told you that you needed to go and pursue this in earnest, how did you make your first steps into the industry? And then how did you kind of come to write the sketch shows for BBC Radio 4?
I'm not sure my dad said it in earnest like that. You make him sound like he was very encouraging. I think he was very, very dubious that there would be any success in this. But he thought, you need to get it out of your system. So the first breakthrough was Rob and I decided we would lower our sights from television to radio. So we didn't listen to any radio. We just presumed it wouldn't be as good as television. And then we wrote a sketch show and sent it off. Didn't take a copy of it. And then didn't hear anything for about 3-4 weeks, and then made a phone call to say, have you got our script? And they said they hadn't. So we then had to remember the entire script, which we did, then sent it off again. And a guy there called Edward Taylor read it and thought it was Radio 3.5. He said, it's not Radio 3 and it's not Radio 4, it's sort of in between. There were sort of Latin jokes and what have you. And he said, however, there's clearly talent here. We think you should go and meet the comedy producers at BBC Manchester, because that's where we were based. So that's what we did. We showed up one day dressed in suits like we were going to meet, like we were accountants, and met a producer who wore a pair of jeans and a T-shirt in a pub. And he happened to be making a sketch show for new writers called Comedy First. And so we were still working in this computer place. We took a week off work and we decided to do a Raymond Chandler parody about waxworks who were being melted down, and Humphrey Bogart waxwork investigated what was going on. So I read 3 Chandler novels and Rob read 3 different Chandler novels, and then we wrote this 3-minute sketch, and it was the sort of hit of the show. And then we were invited to, they threw the pilot away and said, it's no good apart from your sketch. And we were then commissioned to write half the new pilot. And after that, we were kind of, our foot was in the door. People were incredibly helpful and nice to us, and we kind of went from there.
What do you think the kind of ecosystem of that period was like compared to today for people coming up, and particularly in sketch comedy? Obviously, there's such a role with social media and Instagram now. Do you think it was what was better in those days, and maybe what are the advantages of how it works now?
I think a lot of it is luck, being in the right place at the right time. The first producer we worked with was a guy called Bob Oliver Rogers, who we got on really well with him. But he died of a heart attack aged 31. And then we were passed on to the next guy, who was called Mike Craig, who was sort of like the variety producer, although he had written for Morecambe and Wise with Barry Cryer. And he knew it was always like, a few more pages, lads, just write a few more pages. And he used to do this with his fingers. And he sort of became our mentor and would introduce us to, we were huge Bob Hoskins fans. And we were in the bar one day, BBC bar, and I went, oh my goodness, look, there's Bob Hoskins. And he's sitting next to, in fact, it was Thora Hird. And Mike said, oh, don't you know Bob? Have you never met Bob? And we went, no, of course not. No. He said, oh, come on, I'll take you across. I'll introduce you to Bob. And then it was like, Bob, this is Rob and Doug. They're the 2 most talented comedy writers in the country. I work for Morecambe and Wise, but these boys are going places, Bob. So it's like, Bob, what you drinking? Boys, sit down, I'll get the drinks. And off he went to get the drinks. And then I went, oh, how long have you known Mike, Bob? And he said, I've just met him. And that was sort of what Mike was doing for us. He was sort of one-man advertising machine, just introducing us to famous people and saying, oh, these guys are really good.
Having someone vouch for you like that is pretty remarkable and important.
I know, just incredible.
Did you, at what point in the kind of whole process, did you get an agent if you did get one at that point?
Well, we did. We got an agent because we wrote for Bernie Clifton. And if you know about Bernie Clifton, he used to ride around on an ostrich. In fact, I think he still does. And was like the hit of one of the Royal Variety shows. But he was just riding around on an ostrich, where not a real ostrich, a puppeteer ostrich. And so then he was going to do a radio show, but his whole act was visual. So anyway, long story short was Mike said, oh, you should write for Bernie Clifton. And so we wrote for Bernie Clifton, and Bernie Clifton agent came up and then asked us to be to represent us. And so that was how we got an agent that way.
And could you tell us about your period at Spitting Image? We saw you were reportedly brought in to save the show. If you tell us a bit about that, but also maybe for some of our younger listeners who are not familiar with it, or at least when it originally came out, explain a bit about the kind of role and the importance that Spitting Image had in 1980s Britain.
Yeah, you can't really. It's incredibly difficult to talk about it now, just or to help make people understand, because it was. I mean, as it's on YouTube now, but the effect of it when it first went on television was incredible. It was very exciting at the beginning. This is going to be, the puppets are so hideous, are so revolting, so grotesque. And the first 6 shows did not go well. And then Rob and I were brought in. And we changed some things, but then it just became absolutely enormous, to the extent where there was talk of us doing. We were never really interested, Rob and I, in doing the Royal Family. I mean, when you think about it now, all the incredible things that were going on that no one knew about. But anyway, we just thought it was a soft target, so there was nothing to say. However, that some people, John Lloyd loved the Royal Family, them playing Monopoly. I just didn't understand why that was considered satire. But one of the things he was keen to do was to bring in the Queen Mum. So there was an announcement that the Queen Mum was going to be, a puppet was going to be made of her, and it was front page of the Daily Mirror. That this is just front page of the Daily Mirror. This is absolutely outrageous. They've gone too far. This cannot be allowed. And then at the end of the show, the Queen Mum just came in and waved. And that was her only contribution to that particular show. And John's idea was, right, we've done that. We've made them look like absolute stupid idiots. Now, 3 weeks later, we'll have a drinking gin and betting on the horses and what have you. And that's exactly what happened. So... yeah, it got a lot of press.
That's, remarkable, and a very good way to play it as well. You mentioned targets, and this is a very broad and difficult question to answer, but in your opinion, what are the kind of rules for effective satire, or for satire that has like real bite? What do you think the kind of optimal target is, and how do you go about sort of taking them down?
I think you've got to go for worthy targets who deserve it. There's a trend, possibly, certainly by one of the people who is at Spitting Image and still there now, who goes for who's absolutely beloved. Let's do them. Why? What have we got to say about them? Well, nothing, but it will cause outrage. So just let's do. It's a bit similar, I suppose, to the Queen Mum. It's the same technique. So let's take Paddington, whatever, and do them. I don't really consider that, especially now, to be a worthy target. I mean, there are a few things that would be quite worthy. I mean, you could even have done something on the Queen Mum and Paddington, where you go, all right, there's something here about the manipulation and whatever. But Just the soft targets I don't like.
Hello, listeners. This is a notice to say that we have once more improved our crowdfunding offerings.
Firstly, we now have a subscription option on Apple Podcasts, where you can hear extra exclusive content from our guests in mini episodes that come out in between the main instalments of the show.
Secondly, on Patreon, we're continuing to offer the bundle of successful journalistic pitches, which goes to anyone who contributes $5 a month or more. You can read pitches to, among others, The New York Times, The Guardian, The New Yorker, The Economist, The Washington Post, New Scientist, GQ, and the BBC. The whole compendium runs to a whopping 160 pages. Go to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/always take notes to see the full list of publications included in the pack.
Anyone who contributes $10 per month or more now also gains access to the exclusive mini episodes. You can listen for free to a sample mini episode with novelist Lee Child on our Patreon page. At that price point, you also get a signed copy of our book. The first 10 new sign-ups at this level will likewise receive a license to Scrivener worth £55. 7 of those are left. This specialist word processing software helps you organise long writing projects, such as novels, non-fiction books, academic papers, and even scripts.
Lastly, anyone who contributes $15 a month or more gets all of these benefits, plus an Always Take Notes mug. They can also join an exclusive monthly call with us to discuss any aspect of their writing lives, including workshopping pitches. All paid Patreons have the opportunity to chat online with other supporters of the show and also to submit questions for upcoming interviews. Once again, you can find all the offers at patreon.com/always take notes.
Could we turn now to the Chicken song? So 1986, parody of Agadoo, number one for 3 weeks. We saw that you wrote it in 5 minutes. Tell us about this chapter of your career.
It was simply we'd rewritten Every Breath You Take. Someone had sent a lyric in, which was a good idea, but it didn't quite work. And it turned into Every Bomb You Make, which... with the Sting song. And then the next thing we knew was Sting himself was recording it in Paris. And it went out and it ended, I think, the series. No, it ended a show. And it was a really powerful piece, just about Every Bomb You Make, we're watching you. And it looked like that was going to be released as a single, and Rob was just really proud. We weren't going to make any money off it, but that wasn't the point. It was just we were really proud that this was going to... And we fully expected it to go to number one. And then Spitting Image couldn't do the deal, so it didn't happen, and we were really disappointed. And I swear this is true. I went in, and Rob was sitting opposite me, and I said, look, come on. We've written some songs for Spitting Image before. We did We're Afraid of Bob, about Bob Geldof, and we did some other ones. Let's seriously sit down and write a number one single, because with the Spitting Image, power of Spitting Image in the press, if it's the right kind of song, it could go to number one. And Rob said, have you got any idea? And I said, yeah, let's do Agadoo. Let's do a parody of Agadoo, one of those really annoying summer hits, but with really surreal Steve Martin stand-up, wild and crazy guy type lyrics. And Rob said, stick a chicken in the air, and hold a chicken in the air. And I said, stick a deck chair up your nose. And we did alternate lines almost all the way through it. And it took about 5 minutes. And I went, that's it. That's number one. That's number one. And Ian Hislop and Nick Newman came in, because they always used to write the topical sketches with us on Fridays. I remember going out and going, we've just written a number one. Honestly, it's going to be number one. And they went, yeah, sure. And then, sure enough, it went in straight in at number one and stayed there for 3 weeks.
You didn't write the music, is that right?
No, that was Phil Pope.
Yeah.
Phil Pope wrote the music, yeah.
Because I've heard comedians that write musical songs have said how hard it is because it has to work not only as comedy, but it also has to be a catchy melody, right? That people actually.
Oh no! To be fair to Phil,
song.
Absolutely no. It had to be really annoying. And in fact, when I first heard it, I didn't think it was catchy or annoying enough until I was driving home and couldn't get rid of the thing in my head. And I thought, oh no, actually, it works. Phil's absolutely nailed it. So yeah.
Could we turn now to Red Dwarf? I mean, this was a huge part of my childhood, but it was interesting. We saw that it took 3 years to sell the show. Tell us about the kind of challenges of getting that literally off the ground.
We were working at Spitting Image, and it was the end of one of the seasons, and partly based, I think, on the Chicken Song being number one. It's like, right, okay, now let's try and write a hit sitcom. And we'd written a radio show for Radio 4 called Son of Cliche, and in that there was this sketch called Dave Hollins Space Cadet, which was about the lone survivor on a spaceship with just his computer. And we went, let's use that as a template to get us started on this sitcom idea. But we agreed we don't want any aliens and we don't want any robots, because that's a cliche. But so we came up with the idea of, okay, he'll be the last human. There'll be the computer, rather than being brilliant, because they're mostly brilliant in science fiction shows, he'll have gone senile, and we'll have a hologram, and we'll have someone who wasn't evolved from apes, we'll have someone who was evolved from cats. And then we created this story why they would be there 3 million years into deep space. So we did that and wrote most of that in 5 days in a cottage in Wales, and then finished it when we got back down to London. Sent the script off to Paul Jackson and John Lloyd. Lloyd read it really quite quickly and called our agent to say how much he'd liked it. Then our agent called Paul Jackson and said, you better get a move on here. John Lloyd likes this. And so Paul read it that night and he liked it. There was a bit of to and fro, were they going to produce it, co-produce it together? But anyway, John dropped out because I think he was doing Blackadder. And then Paul took it to the BBC and they rejected it twice. I said, he's not pitching it right, clearly. Please get us a meeting with the head of comedy, and Rob and I will go in and we'll pitch it. So we went in and we pitched it. And basically, the guy was called Gareth Gwendon. He just didn't get the idea. He said, science fiction is always really expensive, true. And we've just done Hitchhiker's Guide, and Hitchhiker's Guide on TV didn't really, apart from being expensive, didn't really work. It worked on radio, it worked in novels, but it didn't really work on TV. And in the end, we persuaded him that science fiction could offer a lot of things, because you could use it to look at character and use the science fiction tropes to see all sorts of different angles on character. And he, in fact, wound up commissioning us to write a science fiction comedy script. But anyway, the one we wanted to do was Red Dwarf. Channel 4 came along almost immediately and said, we want to do it as a film on 4. And we said, no, we don't think this is a film on 4. We want it to be a sitcom. So then nothing happened for a while. I think it was 3 years later. BBC Manchester were looking for something a bit off kilter, wanted an excuse, I think, probably, if it didn't work, and most sitcoms don't work, that at least they were trying something different. And Paul Jackson had 3 scripts in his briefcase, and he took out all 3. And he said, there's one I prefer here, but I'm not going to tell you which one it is. Take a read. This was to Peter Risdale Scott, who was the head of Manchester, and Peter chose Red Dwarf. We never found actually which one Paul Jackson thought was the best one. And so then, having been rejected by the BBC in London 3 times, the series we went into production to make it. But it was cast, and we were very much involved in that. But then there was an electrician strike, so we rehearsed each show, and then each show was cancelled because there were no electricians. And so we rehearsed all 6 shows, and then it was shelved, and we weren't sure whether it was ever going to be rebooted again, but sure enough it was. And that was a huge advantage then, because we kind of worked with the guys and we knew them as people as well as, and got to, see how this would all work. And then off we went.
The rest is history, so to speak. I was interested by the fact that you quickly made that decision that you didn't want to have aliens in it, because as you said, there's tropes and cliches can be quite a useful vehicle for, using viewers' expectations and subverting them, or using them to develop character in some way. So what was it about aliens and robots that you were like, no, not touching that?
Aliens was because we didn't want to land on the planet Quirgle every week and meet the Quirgolians, and then the following week, whatever. And it's nothing to do with character comedy. So we wanted we loved Dark Star, we loved Silent Running, we loved the loneliness of deep space. And also we were in a sort of Thatcherite Britain where you'd go into shopping malls and you'd have like disenfranchised kids hanging around without jobs, not being able to buy anything. And there was something I found absolutely haunting about this huge space where there's no one, everyone else seems kind of invisible, and they were, on their own. And I think part of that is kind of stirred into the mixture of this 5-mile long spaceship with just 2, 3, 4 people. So it kind of came from that. And the robot, Rob was more against robots. He was just trying to avoid cliches. But then I remember John Lloyd ringing up after the first season going, "You need another character." And I went, "I couldn't agree more, John. I'm working on it." And Rob, we did actually have a robot in the first show of season 2, who was Crichton, who was then played by David Ross. And then when we came to season 3, I went, "Rob, it's time, to tear up the robot role. We need to get, Crichton's a really good character. Let's get him back and put him in." And after about 6 weeks of, we generally had a rule that if one of us disagreed on something, the other wouldn't pursue it. But I broke our rules and wore him down, thank God. And then we got Crichton back, but he wasn't able to be played by David Ross because he was busy at the time. So Robert Llewellyn played him, and the rest it was absolutely wonderful.
We touched on this at the beginning of the interview when we were talking about the differences between writing prose fiction and writing for TV or film. But how did budgets have a role kind of shaping the storylines? And maybe just to broaden the question a bit, again, there's been a lot of discussion about how the advent of streaming and things like that has kind of pushed up the production cost of TV in general. So tell us about how it worked at that time, and again, how things have maybe changed since the period you were making that.
When we first came up with the idea, the one thing I said to Rob was, I don't want this to look like Blake 7, because Blake 7, I can hardly watch that. It was on BBC One. It was a hit BBC One show, but everything looked so cheesy, and it was everything I thought that gave science fiction a bad name. So no one, apart from the hardcore, took science fiction seriously on television because it looked certainly British. Star Trek, on the other hand, was the original classic Star Trek looked incredibly good in comparison. And of course, what we wind up with is something that isn't as good as Blake 7 when we did it. And the sets were just, so wooden and so cheap looking and wobbly. And it was like, right, okay, this is all we get. And which is kind of threw me into why I wanted to be a producer. To make it look, and it was finally we officially became producers on season 3, where everything went up, certainly in production values, a huge amount, although the budget was the same. It was just, I don't know what the reason was. I suppose it was we were given more instructions, we were saying what we wanted, and because we had some sets already, our production budget set was able to go and make new sets. So we had, a larger expanse of sets to use.
What's that famous phrase? It's like Hollywood is run by accountants or something. It's like the factor that everyone has to
well, yeah, there is a budget, and you have to adhere to that. But there are also there are ways and ways, and so it didn't need to look as one-dimensional as it did. The thing is, we were in BBC Manchester. That they used to make Question of Sport and do the Northwest News. They weren't, the people who were working on it weren't, huge names in terms of production designers or anything else. In fact, the guy who did the lighting was a young man at the time, the lighting director, who turned out to be absolutely wonderful. But he got the job because none of the experienced lighting directors wanted to go anywhere near it. So it was the ragtag.
I wonder often with this stuff as to what extent it's about shifting audience expectations as well. Because we interviewed Abby Morgan a little while ago, and I've returned to a couple of shows that she must have written about a dozen years ago. So I was watching the Birdsong adaptation and also The Hours, and these are kind of big, prestigious British costume dramas from the time. But if you spent 10 years watching streaming and stuff, I was thinking particularly about the First World War, which is like how it's like how many trenches can you dig, right? And they sort of do it with one, and then I was watching All Quiet on the Western Front, the recent version, and you just think like they must have had 30 times the money or something. And once you've seen that, it's kind of hard to look back. But I feel that if you haven't been spoiled, as it were, then your suspension of disbelief can kind of operate more easily. Do you think there is a sort of ratchet effect that happens with audiences? I think
what I found, I was so appalled by looking at the set, but the reason why the series was a hit was because people didn't mind the set. They actually saw the wonky wobbliness of it. It made us an underdog. And so then they were sort of concentrated on the character dynamics. So at the end of the day, we look at, really good CGI now, absolutely amazing, incredible, invisible, but it doesn't mean that we'll love the film. We just go, so they've blown up this, they've blown up that, they've done this, he's flown down the street, he's done that. And we're unmoved, because in the end, the most important thing are the character relationships.
I guess also, because you were working within a comedy format, the audiences are probably a little bit more accepting of the kind of rough around the edges, touches.
Check out I, Claudius. Check out I, Claudius, the top BBC drama on BBC Two in the 70s. And our set was about as good as I, Claudius. So it's not... Yeah.
You've mentioned as well working with Rob Grant. Tell us a little bit about how that writing partnership worked in practice. How did you come together to write scripts?
We went to school together. We wound up in the same university together. I read that article in the Daily Express. He wanted to co-write it with me, so we did. And everything we wrote, he typed, but every line we would agree what the line was, and we did that way for scripts and for novels, and we would plan it out before we wrote it, so we would absolutely know where we were going, and we would be pretty sure of the end. And before we started, I had a book and I'd write down all our ideas, and we had to have like 40 ideas on, this is particularly for Red Dwarf, before we choose one. And then we go, what's our favourite idea? And then we go, it's idea number 7. Okay, let's write that. And then we'd flesh it out and write it.
And how did that partnership with Rob come to an end?
Rob wanted to go off and write on his own before, after the electrician strike, where it didn't get made. He wanted to split then, when it was resurrected. Why? Because he just wanted to write on his own. For what he thought it would be, I don't know. How could it be more fun than writing with me? I have no idea. But he wanted to do that, and then changed his mind and came back. And then a second time it happened where he decided he wanted to write on his own. And the second time he came back. And then the third time, because it's incredibly disruptive. You don't know where you are. You're writing there. And I had an opportunity to produce Spitting Image. They wanted me to produce it on my own. And I just said, look, I'll take this producing spitting image job if you want to continue writing on your own. And he went, no, I'll come back. And then when it happened on the third occasion, I just felt enough's enough. We can't keep going like this. So it became permanent then, which is a shame. I would have happily had my entire career with writing with Rob, but it was not to be.
It sounds like it was probably quite a hard break as well, especially if it was such an ingrained part of your process. You were agreeing on every line together. I mean, was it hard to kind of do it on your own from that point on?
Oh, well, I mean, it was... the actual proper split came. We were being sued by Penguin because we were late delivering a novel. Now, in retrospect, this is nonsense. Now I know a bit more about everything. We just delivered 2 best-selling novels, so no one would be suing anyone. You would give them lots of time, and we'd certainly out-earned our the money, the advance they paid us. But anyway, this is what we were told. So we had to do this, and Rob's like, I want to write on my own. I don't want to write with you anymore because I do. And he said, okay, I think we should write this third Red Dwarf novel in a different way. I think we should write different chapters. And I went, okay. And he said, you write the first 3 chapters and I'll write the second 3 chapters. And then we'll meet up in a few weeks and blah, blah, blah. So I did my first 3 chapters. And he showed up and he said, I've had writer's block. I haven't written my 3 chapters. Tell you what, you write the next 3 chapters and I'll write the next 6 chapters. Right, like any normal, person who wasn't an idiot would have seen what's going on. I didn't. So I write my 6 chapters. Rob doesn't come up with his 6 chapters. So long story short is he eventually says, why don't you just write this book and then I'll have an extra 15 months to write mine, which is what happened. So I'm writing this, and also it's like, I've got to have it done I had to write the damn thing in 3 months. And also because I didn't do the typing, I was typing for the first time. And the most stressful thing was I didn't know how to put page numbers on the pages. And I spent hours agonizing and thinking, this is just awful. And how can you possibly write a novel when you don't know how to even put page numbers on? Anyway, long story short, I got through.
Turns out that's not the most important skill.
Well, no, but it was stressful. It was very stressful, that. And there wasn't Google then, so I couldn't just Google it, and no one I knew seemed to know how to do it. So it was not a happy time. But that's what happened.
We are coming up to the end of our time now, so a last question from me. It's a rule of the show we always ask about money and how it's interacted with people's writing lives. So we touched on this at the beginning of your career when you were feeding paper into computers and stuff, but how has the financial element worked along the way? And be as candid or as guarded as you're comfortable with.
I mean, how has it worked? Well, the money... at the beginning, I have made a living as a writer since my mid-20s. I haven't done anything else. So the money's worked out very wonderfully, thanks very much. At the beginning, Rob and I got paid £14 every broadcast minute. So if you got a 3-minute sketch on, that meant you got paid £21 each. But it was quite a big deal to get stuff on. And we were given a bursary from the BBC where they paid us £75 a week between us for a year, which was round about the same as signing on the dole. So at the end of that year, so although it was good from a parent's point of view, like, oh, you are making progress, you've got this thing from the BBC, so they must think they can't think you're complete rubbish. We were absolutely stony broke, to the point where there was no food. At one point, I remember frying, or I was too weak to cook it myself. A friend came, and Robert, we'd hunted down the back of the sofa and found coins enough to get him home to his parents. And we used to go to our parents, and they'd go, "Oh, let's give us some food, and you can take it back." And we'd always go, "No, we're doing really well. We don't need that." And the plan was that Rob would go home this time, and when they offered food, Rob would go, "Yes, thank you very much," and bring it back and feed me. Of course, he was away about 5 hours, stuff in his face. Meantime, I'm there, absolutely starving, and this friend came. He said, "I'll make you something. What have you got?" And all he could find was a flour and some butter. And so he made me something with flour and butter, and that was sort of the bottom point. Anyway, after that, we got into TV from writing sketches, and the money got a bit better. And we sort of Carrots Lib. We did a live Saturday night show. And sort of, I remember being able to buy new clothes for the first time in a long time. Spitting Image, the money was good. And then from there, yeah, we did fine.
I'm glad you've been able to move on from the flour and butter pancakes. I don't know what they would be.
Well, yeah.
And as a final question from me, I want to return to Sin Bin Island. Now that you're working in fiction, do you see yourself adapting these books for the screen in any way, or do you think you'll just appreciate them for their own form for now and then see what happens?
Everyone who's read them has said it's a movie franchise. That's what Craig Charles said. And lots of other people have said it's either a TV series or a movie franchise. And because I write, I think quite visually, and because I was aware of that, and also it's good for the book if it can be made into a TV series or a movie. It will help sell the book. So that's certainly something I would love to happen. Whether I write the screenplay or the thing is I might be better advised just to continue writing more Sin Bins.
Well, look, thank you very much indeed for a fascinating conversation, and wishing you all the best with Sin Bin and with all your other projects going forward.
Thank you.
That was the Always Take Notes interview with Doug Naylor. He's on X and Instagram at DougRDNaylor, and Sin Bin Island is published by David Fickling Books.
Before we get started with the rest of the outro, we have a Patreon to thank. So Isabel Woodford is a freelance journalist, and she is launching a digital course called How to Crack Freelance Journalism. It includes, among other things, a step-by-step breakdown of how she's got her bylines in media work, a pack of pictures that were successful, a complete income breakdown for 2024 and 2025, and various other very useful things. So thank you so much, Isabel, for your support, and wishing you all the best with your endeavours going forward. Simon, what was your takeaway from the interview with Doug?
I watched a lot of Red Dwarf when I was a child. I would say my brother was more into it, but I kind of watched it through him. So I think it's one of those feelings where it's like, a big cultural artifact that was a part of your life, particularly when you were young and impressionable, and you realise that actually a real human being is part of it. So it's always a little bit of a kind of spine-tingling thing to do that. I also thought he was quite interesting. We were talking about, I think, the kind of costs of filming sci-fi, and he referred to some like earlier British space-led sitcom that he described as looking incredibly cheap. That I looked up afterwards, and his description was accurate, in fact. So yeah, it was a bit of a kind of return to childhood for me, which was great. What about you, Rachel?
Agreed. I really enjoyed hearing about his early misdemeanors is too strong a word, but his early days as a student and discovering that this is what he really wanted to do, and also about his creative partnership with Rob Grant and how that eventually kind of fell apart. So it was a great episode. I feel like it was we learned a lot both about screenwriting and about writing for children, so great to have. What have you been up to, Simon?
I've just closed a big magazine piece for Vanity Fair that I've been working on for a long time, so that finally went to print on Friday and will be out on paper in April, and I think online a bit before. So always feel a bit dazed when something like that is done. I've just got the edits back on my book, and they are positive, which is pleasing. And then I'm still reading my 1933 conversion memoir, although
we might hit a new record for how many episodes you mentioned this in.
I'm zoning in on the finish. I've got another 35 pages to go, and I feel that I feel
with the
this is-
dedicated push, you can get there.
Well, I struggle to read more than 20 pages of it a day because it is so boring. But nonetheless, I feel determined to get there. What about you, Richard? What have you been up to and what have you been consuming?
I have been editing the section for the past fortnight, and now I'm back on kind of writing and editing duty, which is nice and fun. I'm reporting a piece about sketch comedy, so in the same sort of mind space as this episode. And I've been reading a book by my colleague Catherine Nixie called Heresy, which is great, and I would highly recommend it to anyone.
Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acombe.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Artemis Irvin. Our score is by Jessica Danheiser, and our graphic design is by James Edgar.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram at Always Take Notes. We're on X at Take Notes Always. If you'd like to support us on our crowdfunding page on Patreon, we're on there under Always Take Notes. And if you'd like to leave a review on iTunes or Spotify, please do.
And we should also say that Always Take Notes is now a co-production with Listening Dog Media.